Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So what started as Donald Trump's attempt to strong arm China like a schoolyard bully through escalating tariffs has turned into a masterclass of how an economically savvy nation can turn pressure into opportunity. See, while Washington deployed what seemed like an overwhelming force with tariffs reaching a staggering 145% on Chinese goods, Beijing has methodically outmaneuvered the U.S. through a combination of strategic patience, economic leverage, and tactical brilliance. You see, the U.S., I've heard this by my one of my favorite economists, Jeffrey Sachs. He said that the Americans are playing poker, the Chinese, the Russians are playing chess, and the Chinese are playing Go, which is quite interesting because if anybody plays poker, if anybody understands how poker is played, when you play poker, you bluff or you bluff a lot. So you hold nothing. Let's say you're holding twos. Meanwhile, you're pretending like you're holding like high value cards or something like that, right? You can have garbage, like you have rubbish in your hand. Meanwhile, you're pretending like you have a straight or a flush or anything like that. So there's a lot of bluffing in poker. In chess, you can't bluff in chess. Chess is very strategic, is very straightforward. So you kind of have to, you have to see a couple moves ahead and so on and so forth. And Go, forget it. I think Go is the most difficult game in the world and requires an immense amount of patience. So that makes, so maybe later on in here, I guess, it makes more sense, but I thought that was a very quick, that was very, a pretty good analogy. And I wanted to share some of that with you. But so basically what Trump earlier this year, basically in April, what Trump called his Liberation Day tariffs. So what he did in April against China. So the conventional wisdom was that was suggesting that China would buckle under the economic pressure that Trump applied and basically in April of this year. And instead, what did China do? Well, Beijing demonstrated that it had learned from the lessons from the previous conflicts. Like, that last time Trump was president, it was the same thing. Tariffs were back and forth with Beijing. So now this time around, China was a lot more prepared. They knew what was coming and they prepared for it. So this time around, the battle for the tariffs war this time around was something different altogether. It was like a whole new thing. So rather than just matching tariffs dollar for dollar, China played what economists called asymmetric warfare. So you see, China was using its unique advantages to maximize effect while also exploiting America's critical vulnerabilities. The result has been a series of U.S. concessions that would have seemed unthinkable months ago. China's most devastating move came through its control of rare earth mineral. These obscure but absolutely critical elements that power everything from our smartphones to fighter jets. You see, when Beijing imposed export restrictions on 7 key rare earth elements in April, it effectively held a gun to the head of American manufacturing and defense industry. The numbers tell the story of Americans' vulnerability. See, the U.S. imported a whopping 70%. Okay, 70% of its rare earth compounds comes from China. Between 2020 and 2023, when China turned off the spigot, the American companies faced immediate shortages and production delays. Defense contractors couldn't build F-35 fighters. Tesla couldn't manufacture their electric vehicles, and tech companies couldn't produce semiconductors. All right, this is a massive blow. That's basically what just completely stop the U.S. economy right there with just that one move, because nobody else has this but China. No one makes rare earth like China. All right, they have the monopoly on this thing. But this wasn't just economic pressure. It was strategic leverage at its finest. See, China had identified the one resource where American alternatives simply didn't exist and use it as a choke point to force Washington back to the negotiating table. While Trump's team engaged in bombastic rhetoric and escalating threats, China demonstrated remarkable discipline. And and the thing that for me, it puzzles me a little bit is that is there anybody in the Trump administration that would advise him like, hey, listen, maybe we shouldn't go this route. The last time it didn't work out so well for us. So maybe let's not do this. Because if you do, just like a game of chess, like, like if I move this pawn and there's another move, that, you have to anticipate your opponent's countermeasures and counter move. And I don't know if his administration is not briefing him or they're not giving him all the information. But this was like, this was an unforced error in a way. You can't bully China. And maybe the other smaller countries, but this is China, price by based on PPP and purchasing power parity. China's the number one economy in the world, basically. All right, but China didn't respond when the U.S. hit them with 145% tariffs. Beijing was like, hey, listen, man, even if the U.S. continued to impose higher tariffs, it no longer make economic sense and will become a joke in the history of world economy. We're not going to keep going back and forth with these numbers, all right? They just essentially ignored further tariff increases, refusing to engage in what Chinese officials called a meaningless numbers game. See, the strategic patience paid dividends. By May 2025, by May this year, just weeks after imposing these massive tariffs, Trump was forced to negotiate. The Geneva talks resulted in dramatic concessions from the U.S. American tariffs fell from 145% to just 30%, while Chinese tariffs dropped from 125% to just 10%. A clear win for Beijing. I mean, they did not know that China was going to do this, that China was going to respond in this way. Because remember, they said, hey, well, Trump imposed all these tariffs on China, is going to cripple the Chinese economy. And then when it was time for those tariffs to get, to be implemented, and he just extended it. Oh yeah, we give you a 30-day extension or a 90-day extension. He just kept kicking the can down the road. It wasn't because of his goodwill. No, because he couldn't. Because China had him by the balls, basically, and they held all the cards. There was nothing we can do. So while Washington was focused on direct bilateral trade, Chinese companies were already executing a sophisticated workaround. They began routing export through Southeast Asian countries, particularly Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, eventually circumventing U.S. tariffs through place of origin washing. So basically what that is let's say, for example, I make T-shirts. I don't know, let's just call it, let's say Coco Bongo T-shirts or whatever it is. And you're like, hey, man, I don't like this guy. I don't want to buy his stuff. I'm going to buy it to the guy next door. From the guy, from the other guy next door, or some guy next to him. Well, guess what? The guy next to me, in order for him to make that T-shirt, and send to you, he needs to get it from me. He needs my manufacturing and so on and so forth. And basically just removing the tag. That's what China did. They just basically... whatever tax is made in China, okay, let's just rip the tag. And now it's made in Thailand, it's made in Malaysia, it's made somewhere else, and so on and so forth. But it's really Chinese goods. And even if those countries if China did not send those goods to those countries, let's say Malaysia's making, I don't know, they got to make tables or whatever it is. Every component to make that product, they need that from China. Maybe the wood, the nails, the glue, all the ingredients, all the things to make those things, they're going to buy it from China. So you can't choke an economy like this, okay? But what China was just doing is the scale at which China was actually implementing the strategy was remarkable, because direct export from China to the United States fell 43% in May, but Chinese overall export grew almost 5%. With a 15% increase to Southeast Asian countries, right, and 12% to the EU. Chinese companies were essentially playing a shell game on a global scale, maintaining their market access while avoiding Trump's tariffs. Now, by the time the U.S. woke up to what China was doing, and they're like, hey, whoa, what's going on here? China's bypassing these things. They're like, hey man, we're gonna impose a 40% tariffs on China based on what they call transshipped goods. So basically, China was sending these goods and these materials to these other markets, and they were basically shipped to the U.S. By the time we woke up to that, we imposed a 40% tariffs on that. It was already too late because guess what? Chinese companies had already set up shops in those countries. So basically, China was moving into those countries, set up shop, and they already had footprints around there, and they were sending it to the U.S. So while we said, oh yeah, we stopped importing from China, and we're getting it from whatever company, let's say from Malaysia or whatever South Asian countries that we consider friendly to us, China was already, we were basically getting it from China, from Chinese companies, because they had already bypassed U.S. sanctions, and what we were buying them from was actually Chinese companies that were stationed in those countries, basically. There's this what a brilliant strategy. And we find ourselves playing whack-a-mole in this sophisticated network of Chinese control production facilities operating under foreign flags. But besides all of that, all right, whatever impressive that was, the most impressive achievement was how China used this war as an accelerant for this long-term strategic goal. Rather than simply weathering the storm, Beijing turned the pressure into the motivation for economic transformation. Chinese domestic technology sector had made a remarkable stride during the trade war. I remember when during the Biden administration, the whole thing with Taiwan, and that we didn't want Chinese to get access to these, very advanced chip from Taiwan. So we had a ban on chips shipment to China, to Chinese markets. Well, China goes, well, okay, all right, so you're going to ban me from getting these advanced chips from Taiwan? Guess what? I'm going to make my own. And that's exactly what they did. So what China did is, before this whole thing, before this, that's happened under the Biden administration. Before that, China was 11%. China was making only 11% of its chips that was manufacturing chip by 11%, all right? Now, by 2027, that's going to go from 11% to 82%. China is going to manufacture 82% of its chips, advanced chips, in 2 years, basically. So not only have they, restructure, but now they're competing, all right? Because now Chinese AI companies now rival OpenAI and Google, while domestic robot manufacturing captured nearly half their home markets by 2023. What was intended to cripple China's technological advancement instead spurred a crash program and innovation in self-reliance. The dual circulation strategy, focusing on domestic consumption while maintaining export capabilities, has proven remarkably effective. China's economy, in the midst of all this, right, and while we're doing all this stuff, China's economy has grown by 5.2%. China's economy has grown this in spite of all of that by 20 and this year in 2025, demonstrating resilience that caught American policymakers off guard. All right, the clearest sign of China's victory came in a rare earth negotiation, because by June of this year, the U.S. was offering significant concessions to just restart the flow of critical minerals. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent admitted that some U.S. export restrictions on China would be lifted in a balanced way once Beijing approved rare earth licenses. This represents a fundamental shift in American policy. For years, export control on sensitive technology were considered non-negotiable matters of national security. But faced with the prospect of Chinese rare earth cutoffs, the Trump administration was willing to trade away technological advances, setting what some expert, or most expert would say, a very dangerous precedent. See, by July of this year, the dynamic had completely reversed. Instead of China begging for relief from American tariffs, it was the other way around. It was the U.S. looking for truce with China so the economy won't implode on them. Secretary Bessent said that nothing's agreed until we speak with President Trump. reveal how dependent American decision-making had become on Beijing's goodwill. See, the rare earth weapon has proven so effective that China didn't even need to use it. The mere threat was enough to keep Washington in line. Chinese negotiators arrived at Stockholm more emboldened than ever, knowing they held all the cards. I mean, this is embarrassing. Now, the question that you've probably been asking, and I was asking myself, is why? Why can't the U.S., why can't we process rare elements? Why can't we do it ourselves? Why are we letting China basically take over this market and have a monopoly in this market? CNBC did a great little segment on this. It's a short video. I'm going to go ahead and play that for you guys really quickly. Let's go ahead and take a listen with this one here.
To their name, rare earths are abundant in Earth's crust, but they're often found commingled with other elements rather than in large deposits. Worldwide, China has the highest concentration of rare earth reserves, followed by Brazil, India, and Australia. The US ranks 7th in terms of available reserves. The process to separate rare earths from these other minerals is complicated, expensive, and requires specialized equipment and technical skills. The mining of these minerals also comes with the risk of potentially significant environmental damage.
The mining of rare earths, especially in China, is considered very polluting. When they extract these heavy rare earths, what they do is they use really harsh chemicals on the ground to extract this material in the form of clay, and that material ultimately seeps into the ground and pollutes the water body and kills the vegetation. And if you were to extract light rare earths, which are primarily concentrated in something called as hard rock mines, you need to use really harsh agents to blast off the rocks, which release clouds of dust, and they potentially pollute the entire environment.
Experts say that lower labor costs, weaker environmental standards, and strong government support have all helped Chinese companies become dominant in the rare earth supply chain.
About 70% of the actual mining of these materials rest in the hands of Chinese companies, and 90% of the processing. That's an incredible amount of dependency when you think about how important these materials are to running a modern economy.
China has had the monopoly in this market for a really long time. The reason being is that the cost of production of these separated rare earths and magnets is very low in China, and any producer outside of China cannot enter the market because these prices are what we called as sub-rational prices.
Workarounds. Trump's tariff war was meant to showcase American economic dominance. Instead, it became a case study in how a rising power can outmaneuver an established hegemon through superior strategy, patience, execution, and a clear understanding of where real leverage lies in a modern global economy. The emperor, as it turns out, has no rare earths, and China was holding all the cards. Well, that is going to be it for me for today, guys. Thank you for sitting through this video and watching it. For those of you who made it to the end, if you like this content, please like, share, and subscribe. That will help this channel, my channel, quite a bit. And thank you for stopping by, and I will see you soon.